Due to the graphic nature of the personal accounts and content discussed in this podcast, listener discretion is advised. Many episodes will include graphic personal accounts and discussions of child sexual assault, domestic violence, physical abuse, rape, sexual situations, and suicide.
It was worth it. If anyone wants to know, it was worth it. Let me reap what I sow.
Welcome to Latter-day Survivors. I'm Christina, and I will be co-hosting with our other co-host, Kendra, today. We're super excited for today's guests. Today we are talking to Stacey Brown. Stacey is an amazing human who reached out to us through, I think it was through our website. She sent an email in. And we've gotten to know her a little bit, and I'm super duper excited for you guys to hear her story because I know a lot about it and to learn more from what she's going to tell us today. Stacey is an intuitive healer. She is a certified Reiki practitioner and a spiritual mentor and coach. She also co-hosts her own podcast. It's a spiritual podcast called Spiritual Journey, Path to Awakening. I have listened to a few episodes of it. It is fantastic. Go and listen to that. And most recently, Stacey is the author of her recently published book titled Journey to Soul Center, Discovering the Gift of Surrender. And in her book, she discusses her upbringing as a quote unquote good little Mormon girl and how an incredibly traumatic event in her family caused her to reevaluate everything she knew. And also set her on a path of self-discovery and spiritual awakening. And before I turn it over to Stacey, I'll tell you guys, I was on a road trip a couple of weeks ago, and when I knew that we were going to be talking to Stacey today, I went and downloaded the audio version of her book. And as fate would have it, the length of her audiobook was exactly the length of my drive between point A and point B. So I thought, this is perfect. I'll just listen to it. Fastest drive I've ever done because I was immersed in this book. I couldn't stop listening to it, which is rare for me because I typically have to flip-flop between music and podcasts and audiobooks or I get bored. Couldn't stop listening to it. It's a phenomenal book. If you need something new to read, I can't recommend it highly enough. Definitely go and download it. It's got a very powerful message, and I found myself just nodding in agreement with so many of the things she said, either because I had experienced similar things or because just that her thoughts resonated so deeply. So with that said, welcome to our podcast, Stacey. We're so super happy to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I've already had the opportunity to chat with you and Kendra, and though I'm a little bit nervous,
Normal.
I'm also excited.
Yeah, we're super excited to have you here too. And typically we just allow our guests to kind of start where they want to start in their stories. I don't know if you want to go back and talk about your Mormon upbringing more, since we kind of talk about that stuff a lot on this podcast. I noticed in your book that you talked a little bit about that, but that wasn't the core message of your book. It was kind of more what came later. So wherever you'd like to start is up to you.
Yeah, I first of all want to say thank you for listening to my book. It's always really special to hear from people who have taken the time to go on the journey with me. It hasn't been an easy one, and I think that I would be doing a disservice to the journey if I didn't start with talking about Mormonism, because it was a part of my life from as far back as I can remember.
Mm-hmm.
My parents were not both Mormon when they met.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm usually pretty cautious about what I talk about that's not my story. But I think it's important to note that I actually had the experience of being sealed to my parents in the temple when I was 2.
Oh, interesting.
So my father was raised in a very volatile home. and his father joined the Mormon church because of the freebies that they would get as a family that was in need.
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't regularly go to church. That was his only experience with Mormonism. And my mother was raised Presbyterian.
Mm.
As it has been explained to me, there was some marital discord early in my parents' marriage. And from that, it propelled my father into this hyper vigilant, very active Mormon.
Mm.
And my mother was a very passive personality, and she was also living in a new area and wanted a social life. And so she followed suit with my father, and they were married in the Presbyterian church, but then once they joined the Mormon church and became very active, we were sealed in the temple when I was 2.
Okay.
So my memories are all of being brought up Mormon.
Sure.
And I find that there's a very blurry area in my story, and that is what was the Mormon faith and the belief system there, and what was my father's interpretation of that. And I feel like those lines are kind of blurry. So, and even now I find them somewhat blurry if I'm being real. Like I'm 46 and I'm still like not sure what was the way he kind of drilled it into us, you know?
I agree
But
with that. I resonate with that.
Yeah, and it's really challenging because I don't ever remember a time not feeling anxious. You know, like there was this way of being in the home that I was raised in that always felt very intense and very performance based. You know, like everything was good or bad, right or wrong. I mean, it was just very like black and white in the way I was raised. There was never a question of whether you were getting baptized at 8. Of course, you were getting baptized at 8.
Right.
I never felt like there was any room to question how I was being raised or to ask questions. It was like, this is how it is, you know? And my parents followed that. They never showed any signs of not being a happy couple. My mother was very much the homemaker, and my father was very career oriented. And he was constantly chasing the next big thing with work. And he was very, very successful. And it allowed my mother to be home with us. And she was in that passive homemaker role, showing me that the example that you grow up and get married and have children. Like that was the message that was sent to me. Like that's your role as a woman.
It's the prescribed path.
Yes. I never questioned it. There wasn't room to question it. Like that's what you did.
Right.
I always felt different. You know, I didn't grow up in areas where it was, you know, predominantly Mormon. I didn't have that experience. Like I was an anomaly. And it was challenging because I never felt like I fit because I was so busy at church and doing church things and performance-based things that I don't feel like I really got to be a kid that like could make mistakes without this really high penalty.
Yep.
And my father was very well regarded in the church. You know, I would go to church on Sundays and people would come up to me and be like, you are so lucky. Like your dad is amazing. And there were times where he was amazing. But there were a lot of times where he wasn't. And I don't I'm not angry with him, but I know that those recordings have played through my head over decades. Things that he would say to me that ravaged my soul. And it didn't leave marks on my body, but it definitely left wounds on my soul. There are things that he has said to me over the years as a kid growing up that I can't even fathom saying to my children. And I wasn't aware of it at the time, but it put me on a path of desperation for validation and love from men. And between the verbal, mental, and emotional abuse that I suffered as the oldest child of 3 girls, I was the target. Between that and this like chasing like the love of a man, coupled with the I'm supposed to be a housewife and have children and raise babies, I went into crisis mode at a pretty young age. I started like seeking the validation of men, boys, men, whatever, from, preteen age. And I just was locked into the idea that if I created my own family unit, that somehow I could like do things differently than what my parents did.
I felt the same way.
Yeah, me too.
And I felt like my voice was secondary to men. I felt pressured in all the ways. Through high school, the rules on dating and the coupled with like the insane restricted curfew time that I had, to the constantly being at church and trying to go to seminary in the mornings before school and making sure that you got 80% attendance, because if you didn't graduate. And if you didn't graduate, then how would you get into one of the Mormon colleges? And do you see what I'm saying? It was like this.
I do. And I lived a lot of that.
Yeah.
It's a lot. You're saying so many things that paralleled the internal battles that I also went through. That feeling of constantly, I couldn't get validation anywhere else. So I was going to be the best Mormon girl I could be because that's where I got my validation. And then I figured out that wasn't good enough either.
But dude, here's the thing. I was doing that. Like I was like performing in the way that I needed to, like that, like this is, I'm going to do this. But at the same time, I was boy crazy. Like, I was the girl like making out with so-and-so, you know what I mean? Like,
because you were a normal teenager.
Yeah, but I was a normal teenager, but I felt like I wasn't allowed to be. And so it just felt like this constant game of anxious performance and chasing validation.
Yep.
And
it's a hamster wheel that you can't ever get off of.
Yeah. And what's fascinating is in the Mormon church, I remember being taught about like God loves you, like God loves you no matter what. But there was like this huge but. Like this it was like, yeah, God loves you, but you have to like make sure that you don't do this. And it's like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if we can say that on the podcast,
Absolutely.
but I just,
God's love is conditional.
yeah.
And so are Mormon parents' love. Mormon
Yes.
parents' love is conditional. I think that something that you're saying about like validation and being normal, a normal teenager, it also comes with wanting to be connected. And I think that being in a Mormon family, being in a Mormon culture, we're so disconnected from each other because we're so focused on tasks and so focused on all the things that we need to do to be worthy and all the things that we need to do to have love from God or from our parents, that we don't even know what real connection feels like. So we're trying to find that, and we associate real connection with sex, or we associate real connection with kissing or being intimate with someone. But we don't realize that there's different levels of intimacy either at that age, levels of intimacy and types of intimacy. We don't know how to be real and authentic to ourselves or to each other.
Mm-hmm. And I never even had the idea that I was allowed to question it. Like, it was what my father was saying it was, and there was no, like, this is what's happening. This is what we're doing. And I saw him do it with my mom, right? Like, he would be like, we're moving. And she'd be like, okay. And we're moving again. And she would be like, okay. And so there was just this, like, I started on a tailspin of a mental health crisis at a young age.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to fail, right? So I had this constant anxious drive, but I also felt like no matter what I did, it was never going to be good enough. And I believe internally I was questioning a lot, but externally I felt forced into everything. And I think a big pivotal part in that was my decision to go to what's now BYU, Idaho, but it used to be Rick's College back in the day. And when I was like forced to go to school there, I think that was what really shifted everything, because I got to college. I was at a school that I felt no connection to, in the middle of nowhere, right? Where the rules are not that of a typical American college.
By a long shot.
By a long shot. And I reconnect with a boy that had been a part of my church growing up. And my dad like lost his shit. My dad lost his shit. The point where the dean of the college was like, here, I'm giving you your scholarships in cash. Go to the police station, file a restraining order, and get out of the town. Like, go hide. And that's what we did. And
Go hide from your dad?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's big.
Wow.
That's big. I'm sorry that happened to you.
Yeah. There's so much that I left out of the book, because even at this point in my life, I don't put it past my father to like get very angry, and I still have fear of him, but it happened. It's the truth. It's my truth. And I spent a lot of time not speaking up.
Yeah. And I just want to validate that it's normal that you still have fear about that. That's your brain was developed and wired on that kind of fear, and that doesn't go away just because you become an adult and just because you find your voice. Yeah, I validate that.
And what's interesting is the reason why I'm on this journey right now is because when you go through trauma at a certain point in your life, you can heal and you move forward. But if you go through trauma again, depending on the significance of it, it can re-trigger the past. And what happened to me was my son went through a significant crisis almost 4 years ago to the day. Wow. And when that happened, it re-triggered all of this stuff with my growing up with my parents. And I made the decision almost 4 years ago to cut off contact with all of them. And a lot of it is because of what we're talking about right now. And I don't mean to like jump back and forth, but it's like that's what
jump all over the place. Yeah.
It's all connected, you know.
Yeah. It is all connected.
Yeah.
Christina and I have had these conversations before also, where we've realized that things way in the past, even childhood, are connected to the ways of thinking, the ways of behaving, the decisions we make, our fear. Everything's connected. So feel free to jump back and forth.
Yeah.
Yeah. It just played a significant role in me looking back on my life and kind of taking a deeper dive into not just who I am now, but in who I have been over the course of my life, the decisions that I've made, and kind of coming into more of an awareness. And it's changed my whole life to write this book. And I start off with talking about Mormonism and how it impacts. And I would say the biggest like lesson that was instilled into me was anxiety. Like because I don't remember a time not feeling anxious and feeling like what I was doing was performance based. And it only got worse because my father ended up being a bishop in the Mormon church. And it put him in more of a role of control. And the message that was sent to me was that there was something wrong with me because my father was in these roles of authority, supposedly by God, right? And he's definitely executing a very disturbing style of behavior at home, but nobody's talking about it, right? I mean, my mom would stand there and watch him verbally abuse me. She would watch. She would do nothing. And so the message was, this is how things are done. And not only that, this man who you feel is dark and dangerous is in a position of power by God.
Well, and it reinforced for you probably this, if my mom cannot question the verbal abuse that my dad is doling out, that also validates and reinforces that I too can't question anything. It further solidified that message for you. It's not safe to question anything. Right. And also, you say my dad is doing this stuff and simultaneously in this position of authority in the church. So then there's that question in the back of your mind, right? Where's the discernment? Like, how is it that this man is called of God, but this is going on in my home? How is it that God didn't see fit to tell the stake authorities, hey, this is happening? Like, how did you guys come to this decision that he was the best person for this position? That's me projecting. That's what's going on in my head as I'm listening to your story. I'm not saying that that's what you should have been thinking.
Same. I think the other part of it was there was no space for me to talk about it. Like nothing was being talked about, right?
Yeah.
And my mom's standing there and letting it happen. And let me add to it, my father was never aggressive towards my mother. My father was always loving towards my mother. I never saw them have anything more than like a bickering kind of, like, don't do that.
Yeah.
But I never saw them fight. None of that. And so again, the message was the problem was me.
It's me.
I was the one that was, receiving of that aggression.
Mm-hmm.
And so because I couldn't talk about it, and because he was in a position of authority, and because I wasn't happy and I thought the solution was to get married and have kids, I wanted to get married right away. And
Sure.
went off to college, and I reconnected with a boy that my parents couldn't stand. And my dad flips out, right? The
Mm-hmm.
dean's like, you've got to get out of here. So we do. My father eventually tracks us down. We were living with my then fiance's sister in Utah. And he called me up one day and he was like, you've devastated your mother and I. We can't believe that you've done this. And the solution is you have 3 weeks to come home and get married and get out. Because obviously I was now living with my fiance. So we'd obviously had sex, which meant we couldn't get married in the temple. And my
Right.
father, being this like upholding priesthood man in the church, was like, you have devastated our family and shamed us, right?
Right, because you have an image to uphold when you're in this position.
Right.
Yeah.
So then let's add to it the other part that now I can look back on and be like, my parents had no, like, they were not going to put me on birth control, right? And
Right.
so
That's
then,
because that's condoning your behavior.
right, then to add to it, I'm having unprotected sex because I'm having sex that I'm not supposed to be having. So I just want to add that because, like, it added a whole other layer to things because it's not like I even had the option of being safe. Like I was doing
Right.
right either way, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I fly back to Maryland where my parents were living at the time, and I got married. And the 3 weeks from the time I came home to the time of the wedding was awful. I mean, I should have called it off, right? But like I I wanted out so bad. I mean,
Absolutely.
I had never held a job, okay? My father made great money, so like I got a monthly allowance every month. So like I, I had no life experience, none.
Yeah.
But I thought I was going to make somebody a wife at 18, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so my parents, I mean, it was like being at a funeral every fucking day for that 3 weeks.
Mm.
Like, I mean, it was just the way I was treated. It was like shameful and embarrassed, and you know what I mean? But like, you're doing it because now you've slept with him, so you have to get, you know what I mean? It was like this whole, like, you are a piece of shit
Mm-hmm.
vibe. And there was one point at which my soon to be husband was like, I think we should call it off. And I was like, no, no, no. And we went through with it anyway. And we got married at my parents' house with like a little bit of family surrounding us. And then we jumped in the car and we drove back to Utah, and we lived in College Town, Provo, and Orem. And we made the decision to get sealed in the temple. We got sealed in the Bountiful Temple. And I remember like our parents all getting together for it and being like super excited that we were like finally worthy to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember being terrified to go to the temple. Like legit, I was like, how is it that no one's talking about this? Like at the time,
Like that no one's talking about like
like
what
what
goes on
happened?
in the temple.
Yeah, like no one, yeah.
Yeah.
My parents were like, we can't tell you.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just like, that's just,
I'm seeing a parallel here, just as you're saying that, you know, and I've probably seen it before, but it's like glaring at this point. We don't talk about what happens in the temple. We don't talk about what happens in our families.
mm-hmm,
We don't talk about what happens at church and who is determined to have discernment, who is determined to have authority. We don't talk about how that authority comes about. We just allow these things to be, this is just the way it's being done. This is the way it's done. And we continue to put a mask on wherever we go, like we know what we're doing. You know, I know how to be a wife. Well, I don't know how to be a wife, right? So I know how to be a Mormon. Well, I don't know how to be a Mormon because it's different for everyone, really, you know, depending on what kind of family they grow up in. But then there's a lot of similarities. I don't know how to be a child of parents who love me conditionally. I don't know how to be a college student. None of us know how to do any of these things, but we're taught that we have to look like we do.
Yeah.
So whether it's covertly or overtly taught this, it's kind of this overlying belief or theme in the Mormon church that you can't just be vulnerable.
No.
You can't be who you are. You can't show who you are. You can't ask questions. You can't ask questions of your parents, right? You can't ask them questions because you're questioning their authority.
But you
I
also
can't ask
can't.
questions at church.
Yeah, I was just going to say, but you
right?
also can't ask questions anywhere else.
Right.
There's
So
no safe place.
Right. How do we find who is the safe place to go to? You know,
Anytime,
Well, it doesn't exist.
anytime I tried to speak up, it somehow got back to my dad, and it somehow caused more of a debilitating impact on me. And I think in addition to that, I was being taught not to question anything.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the part that was my dad specifically was that he really crippled me in a way. Like, he wanted me to rely on him for everything, meaning he liked that he had control of the money and that he would decide when to give me money versus me having the independence of a job. He liked that I had to rely on him that way. And I kind of feel like he liked that my mom relied on him in that way. And
because that's all about control, right?
Yeah, because
if he can take away the thing that makes it so you can survive,
yes,
and have no other way to survive,
yes,
then of course he's going to do that. That's a narcissistic behavior.
Yes,
trait.
100%. And he would have a mental inventory of all of the things that he had done for you to attack you with at just the right time. And it's really hard for me because it's only been through this last couple of years specifically, and the writing of my book and going through the trauma with my son, that I've even really truly been able to acknowledge this. But I realize that because of all of this, I spent decades in a space of shame and guilt and self-destructive behavior. And when I thought that I was escaping my dad, what I had attracted to me was someone who was just like my dad. But because of his environment that he was raised in, though we were trying to live the Mormon way and we got sealed in the temple, which was crazy. We'll talk about that in a minute. I was drawn to someone who had a similar volatile side to him as my father did. And it just continued the cycle. And for me, the crisis became, as far as Mormonism, became when I saw another man, not my father, who was like my father, who was a priesthood holder and who was deemed worthy to go to the temple, who was then treating his wife behind closed doors the way I was being treated. And I remember being terrified to go to the temple the first time, and then like going in and being like, what the fuck was that?
I had the same experience, but I never uttered those words for, I don't know, 17, 18 more years, because you don't say that.
No, but at the same time, I was like, what was ingrained in my head was, again, the problem was me, that I didn't get it.
Yes.
And so then you know what I did? I decided I was going to try to go to the temple as much as possible because
that's what they
Get it.
want.
Because I was like,
Yes.
somehow this has to make sense, because if these people that I trust are telling me that this is the way it is, then dude, I'm going to try harder because it's me.
Yeah.
So Kendra and I talk about this exact thing all the time. And
Mhm.
I said it when I told my own story too, that I remember the moment looking around that room in the endowment room and seeing people who were educated, doctors, attorneys, teachers, people that I looked up to and respected. And the thought I had, like, I had this wave of, what, this is culty. Like, what is this? And then looking around the room and seeing these people and thinking to myself, wait a minute, if all of these educated, respectable people in here are good with this, I am the problem.
Mhm.
I'm not, clearly I didn't prepare enough to be here. I'm not worthy enough. I'm not faithful enough. And God is going to strike me down for even thinking such a thing in the house of the Lord. So shut that shit down immediately. Get right with yourself. Double down on your faith. Double down on all of it. And as you said, I better come back all the time and get reindoctrinated all the time. Because what do they tell you? The more you come back, the more you understand.
Yep. And that's what I did. And then I was thrown a curveball, another curveball. And I, here I am, I'm like rigorously going to the temple, right? I'm teaching a primary class with my husband. I'm like, doing all of the things that I'm supposed to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm told that I may struggle to have kids. I had endometriosis and really irregular periods. So it's like, you may or may not. Well, I get pregnant. And now I'm in this marriage that has moments of physical violence as well as mental, verbal, emotional violence. And I'm now pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And at 7 months pregnant, I have an appendectomy and the incision gets infected. And my daughter and I nearly die.
Wow.
I give birth to a healthy baby, which is a miracle. But I'm now in crisis because I'm dealing with the weight of being a mom, postpartum depression, a marriage that's volatile, and we're starting to get ourselves in debt. So what do? I run back to my dad because he fixes everything, remember?
Mm-hmm.
As
Yep.
twisted as it is, he's gotten me to a place where I rely on him. So I always go back, always go back, always go back. Even though I know that it feels really yucky to be in his presence, when I'm in a crisis, he swoops in.
Well, and you're not just in a crisis, you're in a crisis with a baby now.
Mm-hmm.
And what mother wouldn't do anything on the planet to fix a situation where she's now got a helpless human being relying on her?
And I'm like I'm like 20. Okay.
Right.
Like
But he's gonna swoop in and help you, but it's gonna be with conditions.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
And so we pack up a U-Haul with all of our stuff and our baby who's 4 months old. And I'm like barely on the cusp of 21. And we move into my parents' basement, which is a full apartment. Okay. Like we have a whole living space, kitchen, bedrooms, bathroom, everything. And I am in full blown postpartum / Mormon crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And I decide for the first time ever in my life to start drinking. And when I tell you, like, I made sure that I made up for all of the experience that I missed in college. I was leaving my husband at home with our baby and going out and partying with friends. being dumped on the kitchen floor after blacking out and waking up the next morning slumped against the door. I mean, vomiting. Like I I was I was fully aware that I was not good enough and that the problem was me.
Mm-hmm.
And shortly after moving into my parents' home, I had the most violent experience that I had with my husband, where he's 6'4", I'm 5'6". He picked me up and threw me down onto the basement floor, which was carpet and concrete.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a significant like rug burn type injury on my arm. And I finally decided to like show it to my dad. And he said, basically, you made your bed, now lay in it. Like, you wanted this.
Mm-hmm.
You made this decision because, you know, when you're Mormon, you don't get divorced, right? That's the
Right.
message I was told. That was,
Yeah.
Yep.
Same.
I kept on partying until my father sat down with my mother at his side one day in front of me and my husband with a yellow legal pad in front of him, listing out all of the ways that I had shamed them, embarrassed them, harmed their reputation, hurt my husband, and failed as a wife. So the four of us.
Hurt your husband.
Yes.
Not how your husband had harmed
No.
you, but how you had hurt him.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that just sent me on a further tailspin because I was like, well, like, I'm a piece of crap. Like, and I just kept going. Like, every
Mm-hmm.
chance that I had to go out and drink, I would. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
I didn't care. Like, I was taking it out on me. And
Well, and also too, some in those pockets where you're drinking, it's a reprieve, right? Because you're numbing those feelings. And so it's a little temporary reprieve from, like, you can just feel good for a short period of time because you're not feeling good anywhere else,
yeah,
right?
and I mean, nobody had talked about, you know, postpartum depression with me. Like, it wasn't.
Same. I had it
Yeah.
horribly.
But
Well, and you're trapped. Like,
You're trapped.
we were talking earlier about feeling trapped, right?
mm-hmm.
You are trapped when you are in a situation like that. There is no way out, really.
Nope.
Like, if you walk away, you lose everything. And if you stay, you lose everything.
Mm-hmm.
You lose yourself. You lose self-respect. You hold shame.
Yeah.
From everybody in that in all the relationships.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You can't win.
Yeah. And
you can't win.
I couldn't win. And there was something in me that was just not okay. Like, I definitely had a strong intuitive sense my entire life, but it was the anxiety riddling me because everything that I felt I had to resist or push away. And by the time my husband and I made the decision to divorce, I was deep in self-sabotage. And my dynamic got even more distorted because my parents were going through some stuff. My dad had gotten a new job in a different part of the country, and they were going to sell their marital home and buy 2 townhouses side by side. My parents were going to live in one, and my daughter and I would live in the other. Again, my father providing for me, right? And I'm now a single mom with a 2-year-old, and I'm going to college and I'm working part-time and I'm kind of trying to figure out life, and I'm dating a guy. I've totally abandoned the Mormon church. Like, I'm not going to church. I've taken off my garments. Like, I'm done. I'm done, and I'm avoiding. And at this point, I'm making the decision, like, God, I just need you to not be a part of my life right now. Like, I don't remember formally saying that, but like looking back on it, like if there was a conversation between me and God at that time, I believe that's what I said, you know? And so I've now got a 2-year-old. And I tried to call my mom one day. They hadn't yet sold their home, but my dad, like I said, was working in another part of the country. And she didn't answer, which was odd because she was a stay-at-home mom even at that point. And I had this strong sensation that something was really wrong. Like, we've all had it, I think, where you just like know something's really wrong.
Yeah.
And I, without like thinking about it, I got in the car and drove to my parents' house, and no one was home. And again, the feeling was like, something's fucking wrong. I was like, okay. So I call my dad and I'm like, Dad, where's mom? Like, I feel like something's wrong. And he goes, you're going to have to ask her. And he hangs up on me. And so I start thinking about it. And I remembered that my mom had a mammogram a couple of weeks before. And I was like, oh my God, she's got cancer. So I just sat down on the couch, knowing that something was really wrong. And my mom comes walking in the door, and she's dressed in, and you're going to understand the language, but she's dressed in her church clothes. You know what I mean, right? Like she's, yeah.
Yep.
Okay. And like, you know, when we've been at church, because she's in her church clothes, and she comes walking in, and she's like, she's white. And she comes in and she sits down on the chair and she goes, I go, Mom, say something. You're scaring me. And she goes, your father just left me. And I was like, what? And she's like, I just went to see the bishop. Your father sent a fax to the bishop to tell me that he's leaving me. And I'm like, now remember, I'm the problem. I've never seen my parents fight ever. And I'm getting the that my dad's leaving my mom, and she finds out by a fax. Okay. So I'm like,
wow.
Right.
Did he list on that fax everything that she had done wrong in their relationship?
No idea.
Just curious.
They didn't give me any of that. Okay. I'm
a mental inventory. I'm just imagining.
Yeah, I have no idea. But like, but remember, like, okay, so my dad, former bishop, like this has been indoctrinated into me from as far back as I can remember, right? So I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
So I try to call my dad. He doesn't answer. He's not taking my calls, which is also very weird. And a couple of weeks later, my mom finds a receipt for a $68,000 engagement ring.
What? Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
So during this time, I won't go into it any further about that dynamic because it's not my story to tell, but my dad went off the deep end. He started drinking and he would call me randomly and be like, I'm going to blow my fucking brains out. And then he would hang up. He was going out to nightclubs. Wow. And so now, not only do you have a girl who feels like she is seeking the validation of men, she's never good enough because she's tried to live to these standards that no one can ever achieve. Now, like, everything that I have been taught is a lie, basically. Like that's the message at 22, right? My whole world has just blown up. Like my dad has never like had a sip of coffee, let alone a glass of wine, let alone been drunk. Like, what?
Right.
Yeah.
Like, what just happened?
Like, blown up beyond any sort of recognition.
Beyond. And Not only that, my youngest sister went through a significant trauma her first year at college and then attempted to take her own life during all of this stuff that was going on. And so my family was in a full-blown crisis. And to add the cherry on top, my dad now having left my mom and all this stuff going on, we get into an argument and he kicks me and my 2-year-old daughter out of the townhouse that he has provided for us. And we are now homeless. And the only community we can turn to is the Mormon church.
Wow.
Which is exactly where they like you. They like you in crisis, because if you have to turn to them, and again, here's the thing. I'm seeing parallels. You probably already see these parallels. Your dad and the Mormon church, both narcissists, right? Or both narcissistic tendencies. Listing all the things that you do wrong. Listing all the things that you do wrong in the church. So you have to actually come back to the church, but you can't just come back. You have to grovel.
Mm-hmm.
You have to admit your sins. You have to go to the bishop. You have to share all the things. And they're like, okay, thank you for telling us all the things that you've done. We're going to list those and keep them in your file.
And
so we have them to use against you later.
right.
Right?
Yep.
And now so your dad made you feel helpless and he's controlling you. The church makes you feel helpless and they control you. So I'm just kind of rehashing this with you. I know that this is probably all things that you're already aware of, but I just wanted to say it out loud. Because
I'm aware of it now, but going through it, again, it was just crisis, right? Like everything in my world was being blown up, and I always felt like there was something wrong with me, and my father was this like huge, perfect entity that everybody saw, and now he was in a full-blown crisis. It was sending my mom into a crisis with her identity. My sister was in a crisis, and I was still seeking the validation of a man. And so the Mormon church helped me get an apartment in a crappy area of town. And shortly thereafter, within a couple months, I was pregnant and made the decision to marry my second husband, who was not Mormon. And again, because of the sheltered upbringing that I had, I didn't have a gauge for what was, quote, normal for someone with alcohol. I didn't have any experience in that area other than my kind of partying time and that I was going to extremes. But when I married my second husband, what was in the beginning like a casual drinking thing, it became something that I saw he had a very high tolerance for. And though he didn't become angry or violent, it did create a lot of dysfunction in our relationship. And we loved each other fiercely. To this day, he's the love of my life. We ended up having Dylan, who was born with some health issues. And again, the Mormon church swooped in and came and gave our baby a blessing, even though I wasn't going to church anymore. And at this point, I still felt more open to God, but I was definitely closed off to religion.
Mm-hmm.
I always felt connected with my pregnancies. I knew what each one of my children was going to be before they were born, and I allowed myself connection with God, but not religion. And I had a beautiful relationship until it wasn't. And it really was about substances. And it creates shitty decisions and shitty behavior. And it eventually broke us down. And I was 6 weeks into my dream of going to beauty school when he and I split. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm never going to love anyone like this ever again. I won't ever let someone into this part of me again. By this point, my entire family had walked away from the Mormon church, which is crazy.
Wow.
Did they just walk away, or did they actually start doing like their own shadow work and their own internal work? And because a lot of times people walk away and they go and join another cult, or they go join another religion and put all of their time and effort and energy into it.
The day that my dad left my mom was the final nail in the coffin of what was our family. My dad's behavior and my mother's silence created an environment where everyone had to stand alone. You weren't worried about trying to save your sibling because you were worried about saving yourself. And so it blew everything apart. It blew everything apart.
I think you made mention of that in your book. Is that right? At the beginning of your book, you said you talked about your two sisters, I believe, and you kind of were breaking down each of your personalities, and you made mention of the fact that we were in this situation that by all accounts and purposes should have united us and should have brought us together, but we were too busy trying to survive as individuals in our own way. And your dad had this way of controlling you and such that you knew that uniting would only be more harmful. Did I get that right?
And it's interesting because I don't have many regrets, because I know that at the time of each situation in my life, I did the best that I could with what I had.
Absolutely.
But it does still hurt deeply that that I do not have what I think so many people take for granted, and that is a relationship with my sisters.
Yeah.
But the level of secrecy is so significant that it's very sad to see how it divides families.
Yeah, and that secrecy breeds shame and fear. It just exacerbates it.
And it's really fascinating because I had worked for so long in therapy to go through the things about my past and my upbringing and my programming and all of that stuff. And I was in such a beautiful space in my life where I had finally worked through so much of this. And then my child going through something reignites this other layer that you didn't even know existed in your healing. And you're like, wait, didn't I already go through this? And it's like, no. Even now with the tears, it's like, okay, there's still something there that needs to be healed, right? Or released or acknowledged.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I, um, yeah. I
really found myself when I went to beauty school. I found my self-confidence. I found a talent. I found passion, and I felt super blessed that I would get to do what I love for work. And I just felt connected from the very beginning. Like, if there could be angels coming down from the ceiling and singing while I was at school, like that's how it was for me. Like, I found friends there. And I was again in like kind of like a party season because a lot of the people I was going to school with were younger than me. So I kind of partied my way through my divorce from my second husband. And I had 3 little kids. And I put myself through beauty school. And I started working. And no one now is Mormon at this point. And I'm like, me and God are good and I don't need religion. That's basically where I was. But I found that when I would put my hands on people behind the chair, I would sense things. Like, I would feel things about what was going on with them. And again, I knew that I knew things. Like, I would have impressions about things growing up. But I still feel like God and I were always kind of not quite good with each other over the years. You know, like, I had left the Mormon church and he and I hadn't resolved that. And I felt like he only existed in a church, which was really irritating to me. Like, so there were a lot of things between he and I that, like, I can see now where he was there, but like, I held a lot against him. You know what I'm saying? Are you picking up what I'm putting down?
I'm totally picking it up. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. I kind of I've decided that God is not necessarily a
Right.
person. Like, to me, God is not a person. God is
Me too.
everything. God is God, and so I don't ascribe
I
like a
can't help it.
gender, and
It's
I
like,
think partly I know
God,
it's the way we were raised, right? But I don't ascribe a gender just because I'm I'm at a season in my life right now where I have a really big aversion to
yes, me
patriarchy,
too. This is the
and
thing. I agree with you on all fronts. It's like,
right, and I'm not
yeah,
calling you out on it. I'm just saying to you, like I just think that we've been told this idea of God, and how can you have a relationship with a God who is
right.
conditional, and who is a violent God that he has rage and he's a narcissist in the Mormon church. Like, he does really
Yeah,
shitty things, but then he comes back to you and he's like,
right.
worship me,
Like, and
love me, love one another as I have loved you. So does that mean that we should go and kill each other? We should go and like be narcissistic assholes to each other? Because if that's the God that I'm supposed to worship and I'm supposed to be like him, then the Mormons are doing a really
yeah,
good job of it.
like, I hadn't resolved any of this because I spent quite a period of time in my life where I was not a Mormon. I was not a practicing religious anything. Like I said, God and I were like, meh, you know what I mean? We weren't like, and that wasn't what I was even thinking about. I was thinking about, I still am on a quest to find my fairy tale. And my fairy tale has to be like Disney. And a man comes in, swoops in, and saves me, and we live happily ever after. Amen. That was where I was. Okay. And so I
Mm.
have now failed, and I get set up on a blind date with a family member of 2 of the girls I went to beauty school with. The guy rolls up to my house, and I'm like, hell no. He's dorky. He's totally not my type. Like, I'm not interested. And I made sure that on our first date,
I had the biggest margarita on the menu because I was like, I don't know how I'm going to get through this. Turns out the guy is super funny and very charismatic, which totally like counterbalances that I'm not attracted to him. And over time of like phone calls and whatever, he's family guy, has great family, like he's never been married, doesn't have kids, reminds me a lot of my grandfather that I like adored. And I was very clear, this is so messed up, you guys. I'm admitting this publicly, and dude, I feel so bad about it. All right. So
Deep breaths, deep
I
breaths.
say to him,
you got this.
I'm still in love with my ex, and I'll always have a place for him in my heart. I love you, but I'm not in love with you.
Hey, you know what? Kudos to you for that kind of brutal honesty, because you didn't beat around the bush about anything. Like, that guy knew exactly where he stood. Good for
I
you.
know, dude.
Good for you. That's a
It's a
badass
badass
move.
move, but then, dude, he asked me to marry him, and I said yes.
Well, he knew what he was getting.
Yeah. And also, marriage isn't always about like this fairy tale love, right?
And that was the thing. That's what at that point I was like, so what I haven't said is that my ex, I said, we split because of substances, but he plummeted into addiction after we split. And this guy who will now be husband number 3, as I'm about to tell you, he is filling the role of a co-parent with me. And he's like, he's into football, and my son's playing rec football, and like, you know what I mean? It just feels like this is meant to be. And so I'm like, yeah, this has to be more of like a business arrangement, right? I loved him. Please know, I loved him. But like, I wasn't in love, right? So we decide to get married, all right? And again, like, God's still like, we're still not whatever. We get married and we decide to have a baby, and we get pregnant, have a baby. And within a couple of months, I started seeing some issues that I had never seen before with him with addiction. So see, there's a theme here, friends. And through a series of events, we decide to split. And I don't even know how much of this to tell because it's all in the book. I feel like I'm giving the whole book away.
Tell as much or as little as you want.
We end up splitting. So now I'm married, divorced, 3rd time. So I've got 4 kids from 3 different men. I'm running my own business very successfully, raising a new baby and homeschooling a teenager who was in crisis. And one of my sons suffers from a bike accident, a very severe bike accident, and it reunites husband number 2 and I, the one that I said is the love of my life. And I know that it sounds crazy because fuck, Stacey, why would you do that a 4th time? But I still believed in the fairy tale.
And it doesn't sound crazy. I just want to validate that for you. It doesn't sound crazy.
It
Because if you don't have hope in the fairy tale, what do you have? Yeah. There has to be hope, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was really good. Like, it was really, really, really fucking good. We spent so much time together. doing healthy things. We trained for a marathon together. We were a powerful force. And if that's all I get to experience, if that's all I get to experience of love, it was pretty magical. But like I said, trauma can re-trigger trauma.
Absolutely.
And 4 years ago, almost to the day, our son was 17, and he plummeted into mental health and substance abuse issues, and he overdosed in our home on over-the-counter medications that he researched how to get high from. And then 4 months later, he attempted to take his own life by running his car into a tree at 100 miles an hour. And that series of events destroyed my marriage. I mean, blew the fuck up out of my marriage. And sent me on a very profound spiritual journey. I had no idea the power of being in a hospital. And when I say the power, I mean the energetic shifts that are happening in that space. But you both know this because of the work you do, that there are lives entering the world there and there are lives leaving the world there. And so it energetically is a very powerful portal. And
Yes.
I became aware of that through the experiences that I had while my son was in the hospital fighting for his life. And though I had been going through a spiritual journey, and I know, again, I'm jumping all over the place, when my husband and I reunited, we went on not just a physical journey together, but we went on a deep spiritual journey, and we started exploring churches, and I felt called to women's ministry because I knew things, right? And if I knew things and I sensed things, I could help these women with things they're going through. But I consistently was rejected by different organizations, and it got super frustrating. And then everything was put on hold as far as my spiritual journey for my son's physical crisis. And yet I then had these significant spiritual experiences that propelled me into a really significant journey with self-love and spirituality. And I would not even be having this conversation with you had everything not happened with my son, because I didn't feel there was a need to tell my story. I was like, I've released this, I've processed it, I've let Mormonism go, I've made my peace, I have some Mormon friends, I wish them well. But there felt like a connection between my book and this part of the story that it felt like I needed to share. I'm hoping it will help someone, but it just felt like I needed to share it at this point. And I wouldn't have done that had I not gone through this most recent series of events with my son.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just remember reading your book or listening to your book, and it's just it's sort of unbelievable that you're where you are at today. I just remember thinking as you were telling your story, every time things would start to look good, like you'd be dealt another massive blow. And I just kept thinking, how much more can one person take? And I think it's a testament to your own, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is. I kind of
resilience.
Well, I was going to say resilience, but I kind of have an issue with that word too.
Oh, right.
For a variety of reasons. Okay.
To your badass bitchness.
That's what I was going to say. Your badassery. That's what I was going to say. It's kind of a testament to your own badassery that you have been able to take such unfathomable experiences and circumstances and traumas and turn them into what you've turned them into today, and gone in the direction that you've gone in. I stand in awe. I really do.
It's interesting because for me, I'm still in it. I'm still like reflecting on it. I'm still digging into it. I'm still processing it. I don't know why I've been hit all of these blows, but when I am doing the work that I do now, which I guess we can talk about because I made a shift. And when I'm doing the work that I'm doing now, I know that I'm doing what I'm meant to do. And it feels like I needed to be aware of different types of pain in order to be able to help the people who come to me who are in pain, because I can tap into that. And it's gut-wrenching that we as a family had to go through what we did, and that the outcome was that my husband and I are now no longer married. It's really hard to see the sacrifices that have been made, but I just believe with everything in me that when you're given a significant life lesson or series of lessons, it's meant to help a lot of people. And I know
concur.
when I'm doing this work that I'm doing what I'm meant to do and taking the pain and turning it into purpose. And I don't know what else to do because it's the only thing that it feels like keeps me hanging on. Like, okay, I might have helped one person today. Keep going,
You just put into words right there the reason for this podcast. The reason we do this. Because if each of our stories helps one person, or if it helps 100 people, however many people listen to it, if they just know that they're not alone, then here's your women's ministry right here, the three of us sitting here.
A true ministry.
Right. Because what are we doing? We're telling our stories, listening to stories, and publishing stories.
There's so much power in storytelling. I think it holds more power than a lot of people even comprehend. There's so much power in it. I'm curious, Stacey, do you know about the butterfly effect? So the butterfly effect, and Kendra and I have talked about this recently. It's this idea that a butterfly flapping its wings in China can affect a thunderstorm in Kansas City, because that butterfly flapping its wings ever so gently caused the air right around it to move in a certain way. And that air then caused the air next to it to move in a certain way, which then may have affected something else in the trees. And you have this, it's that ripple effect. It's the rock that you throw in the pond that creates all these ripples. And it's not, I'm just such a firm believer now. There's people doing big things that are amazing and we need them.
Mm-hmm.
But these little tiny things like talking to people, connecting with people, I believe have a bigger effect than we understand or know or can comprehend. And it's how I've come to believe that smiling at somebody can actually change the world, because you don't know where that person is. What if they are considering taking their own life and you just happen to be the person that feels compelled to tell them, hey, good morning, you look beautiful today, or whatever it is. And that may say to that person, well, maybe today's worth living for. And that person may run into someone else that they may have a conversation with about, I don't know, could be something as mundane as a car, which leads them to someone else, which leads to something like I feel like every tiny little decision I make, even if it's to pour my coffee in the morning or not. If I don't pour my coffee, then I'm going to go maybe get coffee in the cafeteria at work. And that might start a conversation with somebody. Like every decision we make to do these little things has a bigger effect than people understand or realize. And
I'm a big believer.
yeah,
A big believer in that, because everything that happened following my son's crash, it was like that, where one little decision led to a life-saving decision. And I have seen that over and over again. I trust that.
I do too.
Me too.
I've seen it work.
I think part of it is that, one, you have to recognize these patterns, right? Or these decisions that you make and why you're making them. Christina and I had an experience in Porto. No, it was Lisbon, where Christina is it okay if I share this?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Your automatic writing, where she was told to look for, there's a man there in Portugal that had information for us. So we're just walking along the street. It's rainy, it's cold. And I'm like, look, gelato. And Christina's like, fuck yes. So we go in.
Literally with those words.
Like, that's
fuck yes
that
energy.
was the decision, right? So going with the things that feel good, going with the things that feel right, going with the things that are fuck yes energy. And even if they seem ridiculous and outlandish and like they're never going to work, like if I'm tingling all over my body and I'm like, I fucking want gelato, then let's go fucking get gelato, you know? And we go into the gelato shop, and in there is the man in Portugal that has information for us. And it was very clear that this was the man that Christina had written about in her automatic writing, because of some of the things that he said, which actually guided the rest of our trip and made it so we actually had other experiences that we may not have ever had if we had not been open. Experiences. If we had not been open to the idea that there's a man in Porto who has information for us. He has information to help, it wasn't even information to help us with the rest of our trip. That's not what was said. No, it was just, there's a man in Porto that has information. Is that what it was, Christina? There's
a man in Portugal that has answers for you. Is how the wording came out in the writing. And sure enough, he did, and it led to some experiences that I never would have imagined could have happened to us.
Yeah.
And yet,
and if it didn't happen to us, we probably wouldn't believe that it would happen, right? So we'd
yeah.
start questioning ourselves like, oh, did that really happen? And, or am I just making it up in my head? Or am I just saying this thing that I want to be true? I want to have happened. Well, because Christina and I have each other and we're sharing these experiences together, it's like I can gaslight myself out of the experience all I want, but guess what? Christina and I had the experiences together. So because we had that experience together, we're there to validate each other and help each other see that you're not crazy, although sometimes we feel crazy, you know, and putting all of our eggs in one basket and feeling like all of our answers to life are not as prescribed as what a religion would tell us that they are, but they are instead very intuitive and just being, what was the other word that you were told? Be aware. What was it? Pay attention.
Pay attention to the patterns. Yeah.
Yeah. But pay attention, pay attention, pay attention.
Pay attention.
We tend to walk through our lives with blinders on. We tend to walk through our lives with rose-colored glasses. We tend to walk through our lives not seeing each other and not seeing ourselves either, you know? So then what's the purpose of life if we don't enjoy it? If we don't see, you know, we don't see each other. And
just allow those things to happen. Allow them. Allow. That's kind of a word we've been embracing recently, is
allow.
It kind of goes along with the don't chase but attract. Is just allowing the universe to allow myself to be receptive, allow myself to be open. And it's changed my life. I was thinking, I was wondering, because it was such a profound story from your book. It's actually the sample of your audio, the story about the security guard in the hospital. And I don't know if you would be willing to share that, because I feel like that goes right along with this theme that we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I had some really powerful experiences in the hospital, and one of them that I talk about in the book is there was a gentleman, a security guard at the hospital, and he was this big, tall, African-American, bald guy, like stood out in a crowd kind of guy. And I was aware of his presence every day, but I was in such a dark place that I was shut out in some ways to receiving anything. And one day I walked past him and we locked eyes, and an entire conversation happened in just one like glance. Like I knew that he knew the ability that I had intuitively, and I knew that he had it, and it was just this passing. And not shortly thereafter, I passed him another day, and he stopped me, and he was like, "You're gonna blow the doors off the church." I was like, well, I don't even know what that means, but it hit me, and it like stuck with me. It went to my soul. And I think about the interaction that I had with him, and I tend to be super closed off. But again, being in that hospital space was powerful. Like it was scary, and it was emotional. It was all of those things. But it was also deeply spiritual, and the security guard was just one example of that. There were so many ways that we were blessed during that time with like the outreach from the community and just the way people rallied, and then to be in the hospital and feel that energy there. those experiences that I had will probably be some of the most significant I'll ever have.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I went through a deep spiritual awakening, like another level of awakening in my spiritual journey, and the rest of me was being ravaged at the same time. And through that time with my son, I stopped running. I stopped showing up for myself in the way that I had been. I stopped my self-care. I was codependent with my son and trying to control the outcome of what was going to happen with him, both with his physical health and with his addiction. And by the time he left for the last rehab stay, I was like a shell of a person. I was a shell of a person. Like, I spiritually had some significant experiences. The rest of me was ravaged. And I wasn't fully aware of it, but I was on a quest to save myself. And I began doing that by having a surgery that I had put off that was then botched, and I needed to have a second surgery. And then I started, during COVID, doing my makeup on camera every day for a beauty brand as just kind of something fun to do, because, we were all like bored. And what I found was I was looking at myself in the camera every day, encouraging women to love themselves. And I started sharing a little bit more about my intuitive abilities and doing card readings for people and basically just saying fuck it to what everyone else thinks, And all of these like beautiful steps started happening where I went from like doing my makeup on camera to being introduced to this social media app called Clubhouse and meeting people from around the world on this audio app that then led me to start traveling internationally to meet people that I'd never met before.
Yeah.
And I realized how much I missed myself. And I was getting out of the environment where all of the trauma had happened. And I started to come alive again. And I started to feel seen and heard just for being myself, which was opening me up more to trusting myself and using my abilities. And I've slowly been doing readings for people now from around the world. And I channeled a really beautiful mentorship program with one of my friends I met in the UK. And I started thinking about my journey and how crazy it's been and how many life lessons there have been. And I felt called to write a book. And I didn't want to just write a memoir. I've read some great memoirs. I'm not knocking people for doing it, but I wanted the reader to walk away with something for themselves. And so I incorporated a life lesson and a journal prompt at the end of each chapter, just to get the reader to think a little bit more deeply. And I'm currently in the process of developing a journal to go with the book. So,
wow, that's awesome.
I feel like I just hit the fast forward button on all of that.
Yeah, it's okay.
Awesome.
But I wouldn't even be digging into any of this had I not taken the journey with the book. And so the book is very pivotal because even this conversation about Mormonism, like, I'm 46, I left the Mormon church when I was 22, but it does still have a ripple effect on your life.
Yeah, it's a ripple effect for sure. I think it's, at least for me, and I think I can speak for Kendra because we've had so many conversations about it. I think it's going to be a ripple effect for the rest of our lives. It's who we were brought up to be. It's how our brains were wired. It's the, you used a great word, Stacey, programming. That was the programming we were raised on. And while it doesn't have to define us anymore, it still affects us. Yeah. We still have ties. We still are. I find myself in the oddest moments. I'll catch myself thinking something and then kind of thinking, oh, that's Mormonism talking. I need to like check that, you know? It's just, yeah.
I wanted to touch on something real quick. You said the thing about wanting to believe in the fairy tale, right? And I want to make sure that I'm understanding. So are you thinking like the fairy tale that someone's going to come and sweep you off your feet and save you and all that? Okay. But then you also mentioned finding yourself, writing your book, doing all these things, and I saw your face light up. Like there's kind of a pattern in some of these stories that are told, is that there's darkness and there's difficulty and there's trauma, and you can see it on your face. And then you get to a part where you're like, but this is my triumph right here. This is the thing that actually saved me. And the reality is that you are your own fucking hero. And 100%. We're looking for someone else to save us, but nobody else knows how to save us. We have to save ourselves. We can't expect somebody else to understand all the things that are going on in our head and all the traumas we've experienced and how to get us out of it. The only way to get out of it is by following our own intuition.
Yeah. And I believe that I spent so many years suppressing or ignoring my intuitive abilities. And when everything happened with my son, it was like all of my feeling, all of my sensations were enhanced in a way that what felt like I have to honor this, like I have to do something with this. And so I did the book and the mentorship program, but there were a lot of steps that happened before that where I feel like I was being prepared in a way. I had explored different religions to see where I would fit. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because I love that we share our stories here, but I also want to give like the insight of like the things that I did that led me into this spiritual journey, because somebody might be listening and saying, you know, you left the Mormon church, but then how did you get to be a spiritual mentor? Like that doesn't, and this is what I want to share with people is all along the way, there were little nuggets being dropped. So, you know, I was exploring different religions and nothing fit, but there were things that were takeaways for me from those spaces. For example, I was exposed to a woman who I consider a mentor. She was the pastor's wife of a local church, and she really helped me to understand unconditional love from God and what that looks like, and understanding my identity, like that I am divinely created and that I'm loved simply because I exist. Concepts that no one had ever introduced to me before. And I feel so strongly that it's wisdom that a lot of our children don't have imparted into them. And I think, wow, you know, life would have looked a lot different if I had had this concept. So she really helped me. Another thing was I had a friend who was talking a lot about Reiki. And I'm like, what the heck is Reiki? Like, I had never heard of Reiki before. And Reiki is a hands on healing modality. It can also be done virtually. And her interest in it kind of sparked some curiosity. And I decided to go and take some classes, some Reiki classes. And I got certified as a Reiki practitioner. And I felt a connection with energy in that way. Some other things just that I decided to try: metaphysical shops or holistic shops where you can go and be exposed to crystals and oracle cards and incense and candles. And there's so many things that were part of my journey of exploration into understanding, okay, I put my hands on people and I feel things, or if I'm around a group of people, I sense things.
Mm-hmm.
I went from doing that to kind of dialing in with different ways to connect with myself and with my higher power in an effort to find peace with my soul connection versus religion. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely.
Sure does.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that's such an important thing to impart with people is it's a kind of, I call it the pathway with the breadcrumbs, and following each of those little breadcrumbs. Things that I ascribe to now and embrace now, 2 years ago, I would have shut those things down categorically. I wasn't ready for them. I needed those other little things along the way. I needed those validations. And it's like the universe will give me a small nugget of something and say, here, chew on this, let this work for you. And I see that, oh, this is a good thing. It works for me. I resonate with this. Okay. And then I'm kind of given something else and I work with that. And then I'm given something else. And now I'm in this space where I believe in things and ascribe to things and have seen things in my life that I never, ever, ever would have embraced just even even a year ago, some things.
Yeah, and I think
just
that's
wouldn't
what's so
have.
beautiful about the process, right? Is that when we are when we have been through something in our lives, and we make the decision to revisit it and come into awareness, that awareness gives us then the ability to shift or to change, right? And what I'm
Mm-hmm.
finding is every time I revisit this journey of my life, I uncover another layer, another way that I can process it and
Mm-hmm.
apply it. And in this season, um, I'm definitely nervous because I've changed everything about my life, everything.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel very passionate about helping people. And I tell people, like, what I do is imagine, like, all of us Mormons were raised on one soup recipe with one ingredient, and that's all we had exposure to. And so we believe that that soup
Mm-hmm.
is the only soup there is, and that's the only one ingredient you can ever use, and nothing else, everything else will poison you. Amen. Done. And I feel like what I do is I've experienced all these different ingredients, and my clients, I walk them up to the buffet. I teach them the soup recipe that I use that works for me, and then I open them up to other ingredients so they can figure out their soup recipe. And everybody's soup recipe is different because everybody's palate is different. And so unless or until we start like embracing and understanding that, and that it's our own individual journey, and that God only gave the vision of your life to you, like until we like really truly understand that, it's going to be impossible for us to truly embrace ourselves or others. So this for me has been powerful because I wrote the book not knowing that I was going to learn so many more lessons, but now revisiting it, there's even more lessons I could have added into the book, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep, definitely. I was going to say something about what you were saying about a palette, and how I thought that was a great analogy, and that's how my brain works, is by analogies. I love analogies. Same. So Christina and I have used the analogy of a cage. So you're saying one bowl of soup, or one soup with one ingredient, and that's the only one that you can use. The thing is that they're aware that there are other ingredients that you can put in the soup, but those other ingredients are wrong, right?
Like she said, they're poison.
Right. Those are the ingredients. Exactly. So Christina and I have talked about the cage. We're in a cage, but the door is open. It's never been locked, but you don't know you can leave, or you know that if you do leave, there's all these consequences. You'll die, right? You're going to die out there. It's dangerous. You're leaving to sin. Yeah. You're leaving to be able to sin. But once you get outside the cage, the actual reality of unconditional love becomes significantly apparent. And the reality that inside the cage, everything is conditional upon you staying in the cage. The soup recipe, everything is conditional in the staying in the culture of Mormonism, that you only use that one ingredient of soup, that one ingredient in your soup. You start using the other ingredients, or you leave the cage and show people how amazing life is out here with, it's not that we want to sin. It's that we want to embrace all that life has to offer. And if we're only allowed to use one ingredient, then how can we ever figure out who we are? How can we figure out what our palate is? How can we figure out what our sexuality is? How can we figure out how we want to live our lives, where we want to live in the world? What, if we want to have animals, if we want to, how do we find those things if we're so restricted to the point that we can't think for ourselves and never really know ourselves? Yep. You have to leave. You have to be Eve. You have to partake of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Eve was the badass bitch. She was the first badass bitch. But then she was silenced, right? And she was made to have children, and that was her job. Even though her brilliance was actually what made the world come to be. Right. Yeah. That's I concur. I concur with everything Kendra said. I loved the soup analogy. That's a beautiful way of explaining. And it makes a lot of sense, because you're right. What works for some people doesn't for others. And that's okay. Right?
I was thinking about my daughter right now. She's in 4th grade. And she's learning to play the recorder, and all the kids are playing recorder, and they get graded, and they have an assignment. Who's to say everybody in that class is fucking musical? Like, really? And we're grading them on that shit? Like, what I'm saying, we're doing it like it's not even like, it's not just Mormonism. Like, this is what we do as a society. And then the thing is that we're not embracing each other's ability to be unique and individual. And I want to raise my daughter with more like freedom than that. And in that, I feel like in this season, I'm showing her that. Like, I decided, okay, I'm going to move into a condo, and I'm going to make this business, this mentorship program, and the healing work that I do, and the readings that I do, I'm going to make this my full-time gig, and I'm going to make it happen. And I'm going to write a book. And it's because I feel like I want to leave an impact. I want to do something to leave my corner of the world a little bit brighter than I found it. And if sharing my journey authentically and openly can help another person on their journey, then I'm willing to talk about it. I am super self-conscious about my voice. I always have been. I get wicked stage fright before anything. But then at the same time, I know that we were given this story because it's supposed to impact a lot of people. And the only way to do that is to use my voice in all the ways, through writing the book, through doing the audio, through being on podcasts. I want to make sure that I am showing people that there is life beyond the programming that you receive and that it's up to you to change it. Like it is, I mean, it's not your fault that it happened to you, but it is your responsibility to do something about it. Like, you can't just bury your head in the sand and think that grief and pain is going to go away. There is a part of this that has to be processed, whether you do it through writing, whether you do it through therapy, whether you do it through sharing your story on a podcast. In some way, you have to acknowledge the wound.
Yes. And it's not easy. Doing the work is hard, but it's absolutely worth it.
I just want to clarify, doing the work is hard, but staying in your shit is hard too. Choose your hard, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I had written something down earlier that maybe kind of goes in here where we were actually talking about the temple and going to the temple and indoctrinating yourself over and over again so that you don't feel like you're wrong or the only one that doesn't understand, right? So kind of thinking about that in the lines of like staying in the cage or only using one ingredient in the soup. The more you go to the temple, the more you indoctrinate yourself, the more you question, the more you isolate yourself from those who have brainwashed themselves and double down to protect their own brainwashing from your questions. So I know that was like really kind of a little bit convoluted, but really like it goes to show that if you're not with your fuck yes people, then you're not gonna grow into the person that you're meant to be. If you're asking questions and they don't like those questions and they want to stay in their shit because that's what they're in is their shit and they want you to stay in your shit too. They don't want you to escape your shit. They want you to stop asking questions.
Well, and sometimes I think people choose to stay in their shit because that's more comfortable. It's familiar shit. And it's like Stacey said, choose your hard. Sometimes I feel like I think it's the same reason a lot of us get stuck in certain dysfunctional patterns. Even as we are in the pattern and even as we know, God, I got to quit doing this. It's familiar. It's easy. It's easy. I put in air quotes because choose your hard. It's easy. It's comfortable. I don't have to think about it too much. I don't have to acknowledge a lot. Yes, it's going to come back and bite me in the ass down the way. But in this moment, it's easier. I did want to share, if it's okay with you, if I just take a couple minutes to do this. I don't know if either of you know who Melissa Hartwig is. She is one of the founders of a diet program called The Whole 30. She's written a book about boundaries. She's done a lot of things. She wrote a piece some years ago. I don't know how long it's been, 5-6 years ago. It's titled Choose Your Hard. I put it in a note in my phone because it's so profound. And I just want to read it if it's okay with you guys. Because it so goes along with what we're saying. And this is what she said. It's called Choose Your Heart. It's by Melissa Hartwig. She said, anyone who's been through a traumatic experience knows the dread associated with processing that event. In the aftermath, we think the idea of talking about it, replaying it, working it through sounds like torture. No, thank you. It sucked bad enough the first time. Why force ourselves to relive it over and over again? The thing is, we choose our hard, opening the box, unpacking what's in it, dragging it into the light, looking straight at it, turning it over, holding it up over our heads for other people to see, accepting it, maybe carrying it around for a while, making the choice to put it down, forgiving. Okay, yes, that is hard. But so is what we do instead. Eating it, swallowing it whole, pretending it doesn't exist, that it's not with us every moment, that it doesn't affect every relationship we have, letting it slowly burn us from the inside out, shoving it into a box, fighting to close it, sitting on the lid and praying that we're strong enough to keep it contained, and then falling apart on the days, weeks, months when it breaks free. You guys, that is equally as hard. I chose my hard for years without realizing that's what I was doing until I said to a trusted counselor, I don't want to go there. It would be awful. And she said to me in her no bullshit way, but you're already in hell. She was right, but damn did I hate her for pointing it out. So I did something and it was hard, but listen, it was no harder than the path I had chosen by doing nothing. Everything costs something. Staying sedentary versus exercising, having the tough conversation versus avoiding it, changing your diet versus eating the same comfortable stuff, staying versus leaving, denial versus acceptance. It's all hard and you will choose whether you realize it or not. Choose wisely. And I feel like that's kind of the crux of everything we're talking about, right?
Very much so.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, I think you're amazing. I think you really are.
I do too.
You were saying early on before we started recording that you wanted to be like us or something. I can't remember exactly what you said. That we're goals, right? But really, like, you're there.
Your goals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've been through hell and look at you. You're fucking amazing.
Thank you.
I feel lucky to know you.
I'm so grateful for this connection. It's still quite the journey. There are days where I feel like I'm doing it, like in spite of it all, I'm doing it. And then there are days where I'm like, oh shit, am I doing it? But I'm grateful for all of it. And I like hate saying that sometimes because I'm like, my son, all that happens, like, but I've really come to know myself, and I'm excited and nervous to see what's ahead. Like, I just believe that the people that we're meant to have connection with, it's a soul contract. And I love the work I do. I feel like I dedicate my life to that and my daughter. I put my all into what I do. I really do. I love the work that I do. I'm scared. Like, yeah, I am scared.
Rightfully so.
Yeah.
I think it's good to admit that. I think it's okay to be scared. I think some fear, a little bit of fear keeps us safe.
Yeah. Like, I have these moments where I'm like, it's happening, Stacey, you're doing it. And then I have other moments where I'm like, God, are you there? Is this what you want?
Right? I feel like in the last couple of weeks, I've been in those two positions every other hour, every day.
Yeah.
It's like an hour by hour whiplash.
And I think it's so important to like let our listeners know that, that even when you are feeling aligned with your purpose, or even when you're feeling, like you've evolved or grown, there are still going to be moments where you question and you doubt. And that's normal.
Yep.
I've heard people say, like, I don't feel like I make a difference until I've healed, but we're always healing.
It's a journey. It's not a destination.
Yeah, it's a lifelong journey. And I think the biggest thing that I've learned is that, we really need to learn to love ourselves, because when we love ourselves, we trust ourselves. When we trust ourselves, we listen to our intuition. And when we do that, when we go through that process, we're then able to show up and help other people, right? We're able to take the lessons that we've learned and impart the wisdom to the next person coming along. I tell people all the time, it's like we're all running in a marathon. We're all we're all going to cross the finish line, same place, right? But like, some of us hit the starting line at different points.
Right.
And it's like, right now, we might be at like mile 7. And we know that mile 6 was all uphill. So I feel like we have a responsibility to turn around and yell back to the person at mile 4, Like mile 5 sucks, but like you can get through it. Mile 7's awesome. You see what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
I just feel like we have to do that for each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just keep thinking like the more open that I am, the more space I create for others to do the same.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's like, I don't have it all figured out, but I do know this. I do know that Mormonism nearly ravaged me.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that I am more secure in who I am, in why I'm here, and how I'm showing up in the world now, post religious experience, versus when I was in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that it took me decades to release that guilt and shame that was programmed into me.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
My life is very fulfilling now that I have opened up to whatever my path is and exploring the different modalities and experiences that are out there. And I strongly encourage our listeners to sit with yourself, whether it's meditation, prayer, journaling, whatever your style of connection with yourself is, in whatever language you speak, and ask what feels right for you and your connection,
Mm-hmm.
not what someone else is telling you.
Right.
See what comes up.
Yeah.
You know, I wish someone had said that to me.
Yeah.
I wish someone had said to me, Stacey, like, you want to do Reiki? Oh, let's try Reiki. Oh, you want to try meditation? Let's try meditation.
Mm-hmm.
You want to know how to love yourself? Let me show you. Like, these are ways that you show up for yourself. Like, if someone had freaking taught me that stuff,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, the pain
So
that I would have been able to avoid. Yeah. Sorry, Kendra. The pain I would have been able to avoid. Like, it's just crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why are we not giving kids that?
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think about my own stubbornness, and I wonder if someone had tried to tell me at any given point in my life, or teach me, or pull me along and say, you want to try to meditate, you want to try to do each of these things, would I have listened?
Mm-hmm.
Would I have been open to it at that time?
Mm-hmm.
Or is that something that like has to be on my time? It has to be.
I think it has to be.
Right.
And I think for everybody that time is different. I
Right,
definitely, I mean, would I have been more insightful? Like, I don't know, right?
Mm-hmm.
right.
I had these lessons for a reason, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't know they were options.
Yeah, I was going to say there was never any exposure.
Yeah. Right.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. To say like, I mean, like, my parents were really good about like, do you want to play soccer? Let's play soccer. You want to take dance class? Let's take dance class. But like, again,
nobody told you there was a fencing class out there, or
right.
I'm making up crazy things, but it's true. Like,
or a chess club,
right.
or
right. But then I think about my daughter right now. She's 9, and like, how many options can I give her? Because she in 1 week wants to play the trumpet, the guitar, private lessons, horseback riding. You know what I mean? So it's like, I don't know. I think we do the best we can as parents. And I think that's the biggest thing that for me has been the release with all of this. And I don't think I've said this, is that I hold no ill feelings towards my parents at all. I really don't.
Mm-hmm.
I chose to cut off my communication with them shortly after everything happened with my son, in an effort to go on a journey of better knowing myself without having the programming stuff being triggered without me processing it. Like, I wanted to be processing and for me, there they did the best they could with what they had at the time.
Yep.
You know,
They sure did.
I'm not saying what they did was like acceptable, but I'm
Right.
saying I know they did the best they could. Like my mother only knew to be passive. Like that's what she knew, you know? My dad knew controlling, anger, you know, all kinds of stuff from his dysfunction. And I'm sure that my kids have a list of things that I didn't do or did do that upset them or whatever. You know what I mean? That they could be upset with me about. I think we do the best that we can with what we have. But at the same time, are we taking the time to be insightful enough to say, okay, I need to process this or release this from my burdens?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think something else that's really important is acknowledging. So if my kids have brought something to me and said that, you know, this was really harmful for them, acknowledging it and apologizing, you know, like I can do that. I can't go back and change it, but I can acknowledge the way that their perception of things at that time in their life, where they were, what I said and how that affected them, or what I did and how that affected them. It's not it wouldn't be necessarily my truth, because I'm looking at it from an adult perspective in a time where I'm probably going through trauma myself and doing the best that I can and not realizing the harm that I'm doing to my kids.
Yeah. I think when we know better, we do better. And right now, I say this in the dedication page in my book, you know, I'm going to remain fiercely dedicated to giving my children a healthier mother today than they had yesterday. And that's a huge motivator for me. Like, I know that I have to show up for myself, and I have to do what I feel is right and true.
Yeah.
And for me, having conversations like this is a huge part of my healing, but I think will spark healing in others. And it feels like,
yes, definitely,
when I'm doing this work, I'm doing what I'm meant to do. And I'm hoping that from it will come other people's insightfulness and their awareness that will then spark change for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I believe it will. I believe it will.
I know it will.
Yeah.
I know it will.
Thank you. Thank you for all of this. This was an amazing conversation.
Thank you.
I'm so glad that we were able to do this.
Yeah. Where can people find you, Stacey?
So I have a website, stacey-brown.com. That's
and we want to clarify that you do have an E in your name, Stacey, correct?
Stacey with an E. Yep. stacey-brown.com is my website. You can find me at Stacey Brown 555 for my Instagram. I have email connected with my website, so you can always reach me there. And on the website, there's information about my services that I provide, along with a link for a free discovery call if you're considering mentorship, along with information about my book.
Cool. And I'll just say again to the listeners, go read Stacey's book. If you are at all interested in a healing journey, it's a phenomenal book. The little life lessons and the questions at the end of each chapter are super insightful, super validating. Like, yeah, it's a phenomenal book.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us on Latter-day Survivors. As survivors of trauma and abuse, we wanted to provide a platform for survivors to share their stories. Many survivors of all types of abuse may be able to recognize and relate to the patterns of behavior in the victims, abusers, families, and friends of the stories shared by other survivors on this podcast. Often, as we escape oppressive family, religious, and social constructs to a safer place where we come to see our abuse and all related issues, we are better able to process and begin to heal. We believe that when we share our stories with others, we can also help them to heal. It can take decades for survivors to find the courage to speak about these things. If it is so hard for adults, imagine how difficult it is for a child to speak up. We hope to normalize these discussions so that children can speak to adults earlier. As adults, we must listen and recognize the severity of the abuse, its potential consequences, and the need for action to stop the abuse as early as possible. Just knowing we are not alone, that there are other people who have felt and do feel the same or have endured similar experiences in life, can remind us that we are not alone in this.
I was born in rose-colored water. It seeped into my eyes and soul, and I didn't know the difference. Being blind was beautiful, but no amount of sweet addiction can stop the force of reality. In the bitter recognition, only you can set you free. I don't believe in saints, I don't believe in sinners. It's not black and white in life, it's like gray in the winter. And I don't believe in the kind of love I used to anymore. I jumped ship and I still got my middle fingers pointed from the shore. And it was worth it. If anyone wants to know, it was worth it. Let me reap what I sow. My mother's blood runs through my veins. We haven't spoken years. If we did, maybe I'd ask, what's it like to become your worst enemy? And there's two sides to every story, carved by pain and memory. Time will soften all the edges, but it's still stone I keep with me. I don't believe in saints, I don't believe in sinners. It's not black and white in life, it's like gray in the winter. And I don't believe in the kind of love I used to anymore. I jumped ship and I still got my middle fingers pointed from the shore. And it was worth it. If anyone wants to know,